HRN listeners. As we celebrate our 15th year, we are deepening our commitment to giving voice to the next generation of food systems storytellers, and we need your help. Our internship and fellowship programs help activate new possibilities for underrepresented and underestimated young people through experiential journalism, audio engineering, and production training. Through these unique programs, HRN helps food equity stewards build essential workforce readiness skills that expand their potential and foster economic mobility. Please consider supporting these critical programs. And with a minimum donation, you can be entered to win a dinner for two at an amazing restaurant in one of 8 cities and tickets to a concert at a great venue in one of those cities. We have incredible partners across the country who have donated, as they also share our passion for helping to educate the next generation of food systems storytellers. Check out heritageradionetwork.org/15 to donate and enter to win today. That's heritageradionetwork.org/15 to donate and enter to win today. And make sure you donate before March 31st. Thank you.
This piece was brought to you by Roberta's, robertaspizza.com.
Hi guys, I'm Jamie Oliver and you're listening to Heritage Radio Network, a member-supported podcast network broadcasting over 35 weekly shows live from Bushwick, Brooklyn. This year, HRN is celebrating 10 years of food radio. How amazing. For the past decade, they've been taking you behind the scenes of farms, restaurants, breweries, school cafeterias, and so much more. It's been 10 years, and they're just getting started. Learn more at heritageradionetwork.org.
Hey, welcome to Beer Sessions Radio on the Heritage Radio Network. Hey guys, I'm Jimmy Carboni, the host of Beer Sessions Radio. We've got a special show today. We'll be talking about lagers. It's January 15th, 2019, and we're really looking forward to the show. It's also the 10th anniversary of Heritage Radio Network, so big shout out to everybody who's been part of this network for so long, and thank you guys for coming on today. So a special guest, Czech Lager, one of my favorite beer personalities as well as beer importers, Mr. Matthias Neidhart of Be United is with us. Matthias, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much.
We were on a few years ago. We went up to your compound in Oxford, Connecticut, and we tasted beers directly from the tanker. And there's a lot of great stories that you have. And I just want to give a big shout out. If you don't know Be United, they've been importing some of our favorite finest specialty beers for a long time. We're going to hear that story today. And he brought along with us, everybody say hello. We got a couple of Be United reps.
Hey, Jimmy. This is George, also with Be United.
And I'm Michael Obolensky. Hi.
And a beer writer who puts out my favorite weekly top 10 beer stories.
What's up, Jimmy? This is Chris McClellan. How you doing?
How are you, brew enthusiast? So, Matthias, a couple months ago, I reached out and said, what's a good story for the radio? And you came back and told us about the Czech lagers. So let's talk about lagers and how it's changed, seeing what's going on in the market and the special quality that, you've brought today.
Well, lagers, and basically the bottom fermenting beer styles, haven't had really anything of success here in the United States for the past 20, 25 years. The entire craft beer revolution here in the United States, maybe going back to 1980, 1985 or so, everything was about ales. Basically as a counterpoint to the international kind of mass lagers that were available at that time. So nobody really cared about lagers, bottom fermenting beers, and over the past 25, 30 years or so, the market has incredibly changed over the past 2 or 3, 4 years, and a lot of beer geeks, a lot of beer friends, a lot of beer connoisseurs have now discovered bottom fermenting beers, lager beers, which are very, very different from the ales. And when you talk about bottom fermenting beers, lager beers, you have got to talk about Czech Republic. This is where a lot of these things started. In the 19th century, and so there's so much pride in that industry in Czech Republic. But the thing is, it's extremely difficult to get these wonderful beers into the United States. Not the bigger breweries, that's easy, but the smaller breweries, basically around the city, the great city of Prague or so, they would not ship their beer outside the local area. So this is where our infrastructure, our temperature control tank containers come into play. That really allowed us to convince them to give us a chance.
Wow. And George, how's it going on the market here? So tell us what you're doing. You're bringing in the beer from Czech to New York.
Yes, yeah. So as Matthias mentioned, we have proprietary temperature-controlled tank containers, which are quite large. They have 4 compartments, and each compartment holds about 35 hectoliters worth of beer. They're temperature and pressure controlled. So we shipped one of these over to the Czech Republic, and 2 of our Czech breweries filled this container.
So the tanks go right to the brewery.
Yes, and then the brewery will fill the beer basically from the fermentation tank or bright tank into the tank container. And then the tank container will hold the beer at about 0 degrees Celsius the entire length of the journey from the Czech Republic all the way to us in Oxford, Connecticut, where we will then package the beer. So it's really as fresh as it possibly could be. At 0 degrees Celsius, of course, there's not really a lot of development fermentation-wise in the beer, and it keeps it very stable. So there's really no better way to bring beer over the water. And it's because of the temperature-controlled tank containers that we were able to even do this, because you don't really see a lot of Pilsner that's this fresh.
That's great. Let's talk about big picture. So Czech Republic, Czech in Prague area, lagers their beer. We know that our buddies in Salem, Massachusetts, Chris Loring at Notch Brewing, he really respects those styles and is making some Czech lagers, including dark lagers up there. Tell us a little bit of the backstory, Matthias. You know, there's some relationship between Prague and Bamberg in Germany, some of the history of lager and why it means so much to that part of the world.
Well, ales historically breweries could not really, let's put it this way, they could really develop lagers and bottom fermenting beer so well because the temperature, the climate is very different in that part of Europe compared to like Italy and not Italy but Belgium and other countries. So it's much colder there. So they had from the get-go, before in the 19th century, all these scientists figured out what's actually happening with the yeast or so. They were able actually to brew bottom fermenting beers, and they basically lagered it in their cellars. So there's a huge history of that as well. An amazing connection between Bamberg in the northern part of Bavaria and Prague. Historically, they have always respected each other very, very much. When you actually go to Prague and talk to all these wonderful Czech breweries, they have no respect for anybody else. They say, oh, the Belgians, and that's a different world, but the really true art and science of brewing happens here in the Czech Republic, except for one small area, and they say they fully respect the Bamberg area, the Franconia area, but they basically say they are coming close to them in terms of art and science. So it's kind of a wonderful partnership. Matthias Strom of Echt Schlenkerle, we are tasting the Helles Mürzen here later in the shower. So he explained it to me. He said the German emperor and the German government was run by an emperor, so up all the way to the end of the Second World War or so. He had 2 residences. One was in Prague and one was in Bamberg. So that's already the connection. The very famous Saaz hops was traded at the Bamberg exchange. And today, Bamberg and Prague are basically partner cities. So it has historically always been a very, very close relationship. They are very, very close to each other, Bamberg and Prague, about 200 miles. So it's 2 distinct areas. Bamberg and Franconia, they're very proud of their smoked beers and would never give up on it. And it's similar to the Czech Republic, to their brewing. They would never give up on their classic historic way of brewing their beers.
The Bavaria today, as we know, Bavaria and the Czech Republic were actually linked historically. So they were both part of the Austrian Empire, which was part of this larger German confederation in the late modern period, and we're talking around the 1840s when Pilsner was first brewed. So there is a political and economic connection between these two parts of the world, or parts of Europe. And in fact, of course, lager itself was born in Bavaria, and then later obviously made its way to Bohemia by way of Pilsner. So
The thing I really want to unpack too, just to your story, is in 2019 with the rise of just so much great local beer here in the U.S. Thinking about the audience for this particular podcast, Czech brewing culture remains, I think, a mystery or completely off the radar for almost all beer drinkers in the U.S. Right, the culture, the understanding, the way you order, right, the way it's described, the idea of ordering on strength and color, the idea of what makes a good beer in terms of the Czech perspective on that. I would kind of make a bold statement, but I'd say that most beer consumers have no idea, right, what Czech beer culture is like. I think they really
Chris, you got me.
only really know it.
Matthias, let's take that, and then we're going to go through how do you order beer in the Czech Republic.
Go. Chris, go.
Tell us. You said by strength, by color.
No, I mean I know the basics, but
but we don't.
Oh, okay. Well, yeah. So if you're in the Czech Republic, you would pub culture is so strong there. There's a custom of ordering at the bar. If you're at the brewery, there's often a brew pub attached most of the time. But I can't speak to too many details. I actually do want to hear kind of your the kind of expert insight here a little bit more about. Because most of my experience and most American drinkers' experience with Czech lager is either something they heard about or something like Pilsner or Kel, right? Which is the only Pilsner that they really would have consumed at scale, right, across the U.S. And it's really the only, I think, legal brewery that can call itself a Pilsner in the Czech Republic anyway, right? So there's a lot of that going on. But the strength and color thing is basically you've got a certain category or Plato, which is
that's what you go. When you go there, basically you on the chalkboard. So you have numbers there. It's like 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. It describes Plato or the original gravity, whatever you want to do, and then it gives a color to it. So you go in there and say, okay, I want the 14 degree dark, and then that's what you're going to get. But it's not really a Pilsner like what Pilsner or Quell is. These are bottom fermenting beers. They are all the really great ones. They're all done in open fermenters. They all go through a double decoction. They're really classic way of dealing with bottom fermenting beers. They are unfiltered and pasteurized. So these are very, very complex bottom fermenting beers, yet very simple, extremely drinkable.
And there's a lot of variation too, obviously. Of course, you have, as Chris said, varying strengths and different colors as well. And if you went into a pub in the Czech Republic and asked for Pilsner, they would give you Pilsner or Kel. So to ask for a pale lager, it's a totally different term. Svetlé pivo is what they refer to a pale lager as. It's not Pilsner. In the Czech Republic, Pilsner is Pilsner or Kel.
That's a good point. And just to give us a little more perspective, I know especially with your German portfolio, when I think lager, I'm thinking something like a Pilsner.
Right.
But there are many styles of German beer that are lagers,
right,
that have color. Give us a couple of examples.
Well, historically, I think when you talk about Pilsner, you really need to talk about the history of lager in general. And one of the biggest influences on lager historically was the Spaten Brewery in Munich. And in the early 1800s, Gabriel Sedlmayr II, who was operating the brewery, he brought a lot of this, at the time, cutting-edge technology to lager brewing. That included using a thermometer, which is a big deal.
Yeah.
A hydrometer.
that can't be overstated, though.
Yeah, I know it's a huge deal.
The level of technology, when you look at the implementation of technology, European brewing technology, from basically the early 1800s on, it almost rides an exponential curve, right, in terms of the application of science to brewing. The way, whenever I teach classes on beer, I start with, you can basically assume all beer before 1850 was awful, right, for the most part, because compare it to today, in reference to a lot of the beer that you're used to and the standards that you're used to, it just was not there.
No, definitely not. And the English were really the pioneers in this. They were the ones that first started using steam power and thermometers and hydrometers, etc. So they applied all of this science to their beer. And then Gabriel Settelmeyer II, his father was operating the Spaten Brewery in Munich. He actually traveled to the UK to really learn from all of these brewers, and he brought all this technology back to Munich and implemented it in their brewery. Then we need to, as you know, some years later, in 1842 or around 1842, in Pilsen, they sort of famously, in like I think 1838 it was, the sort of town council dumped out all of this beer in the sort of city center because their brewery at the time was just awful, and they looked to Bavaria for inspiration, and they wanted to brew the then popular lager style. And at the time, it was this very dark lager. And so they brought over a brewer from Bavaria, a man named Josef Groll, and then they, in fact, sent an architect to Munich to figure out how to build a proper brewery. And then in 1842, they brewed the first Pilsner. Josef Groll, he was Bavarian. His whole brewing team was Bavarian. And the rest is history. And it totally changed lager in general, and this style then quickly started to sort of take over Europe.
That changed brewing.
Yeah.
That's the single most important beer ever made. If you look at the trajectory of the beer industry from the 1840s on.
Yeah,
right.
Big time, because its influence was massive, and as we'll see as we drink through some of the beers we have today, it influenced brewing culture all over the world. The Germans had to change the way that they brewed, so you saw the birth of things like Dortmund Lager, the Helles, the Kolsch, and then the English even had to change the way that they brewed ales so that they were lighter and a bit fresher and sweeter. So,
what was the first beer that we had?
The first beer that we had was from St. Georgenbräu. They are a very old brewery. They were established in 1624, and this is their Keller beer.
Yeah, and I think it's a great example. I would not totally agree what Chris and George said in terms of that the beers before like 1850 or so were awful.
They were different.
Pretty bad generalization.
I think they were very different, and there was one thing absolutely not that they were consistent. But because they didn't really know what they were doing from a scientific perspective. But let's talk about the St. Georgen, the Keller beer. That goes back to the 16th century where they started to brew it. I would be totally interested in how it actually tasted when they did it around that time. I believe that it was an extraordinary beer back then as well. Maybe not consistent. Maybe each time you went to the brewery and had it, it was very different. But it was I think they've had figured it out how to do it without scientifically knowing how they did it and without scientifically be able to control it. Keller beer has a huge history, goes back 400 years at least. It's a bottom fermenting beer brewed in Buddenheim, very close to Bamberg, same area. So they basically lagered it in deep cellars, and basically they during the maturation they let the CO2 fermentation, they let the CO2 out. So it basically was was a lager bottom fermenting beer with very, very little fizz, so to speak. And a wonderful color, a little bit kind of an amber color, a malty color. So total opposite to a Pilsner. It was really a wonderful. It's a wonderful lager beer.
And this is a beer that is very important, I think, or the style in general, as far as like the history of lager goes. Because the earliest lagers probably looked something like this, although they would have been a bit darker. But as Matthias was saying, these beers were matured in caves, and historically, way back in the 15th, 16th century, these beers would have been, again, stored in those caves, and those caves would have been like packed full of ice so that the beer would stay stable over the winter or over the summer months.
And probably also a little bit smoky. Because it was more or less the only way they could really kill their malt, their grains at this time.
Yeah, most beer, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
But it was really in these caves in Bavaria, mostly in Franconia, where it's really widely believed that the lager yeast strain, as we know it today, like Saccharomyces pastorianus, was born. It was a cross between a cold tolerant strain of yeast and your Saccharomyces cerevisiae, your classic ale yeast strain. So it was in these caves that this yeast strain was kind of bred over centuries, and then of course it was put into use by Gabriel Sedlmayr and all of these breweries in Munich, and then eventually in Bohemia as well, and then all over the world.
And I know, Matthias, you must be excited about this shift we were talking about. 5 years, 10 years ago, people were really getting into IPAs, and now I think that whenever I have a New York City brewer on the show, they all come to the bar at Roberta's Pizza and they order a German Pilsner. Mm-hmm. That's a big change. Even a year ago, that wasn't the case.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's over the past 20 years here in the United States, and it obviously in all the countries that basically have followed the United States craft beer development, and almost every single country has been doing that. It was all about ales. The fruity esters were very intriguing. Obviously, the many styles from Belgium impacted a lot, and I would have never thought, to be very honest, that craft beer movement would make this huge shift into a beer into a beer style, the bottom fermenting beers, that is so totally different from the ales. There are basically no fruity esters in there. The lower temperature takes it away. You don't have these huge varieties of different styles that you can brew with. They're pretty simple. They're pretty, I don't want to say one-dimensional, but they are very, very straightforward, very simple, yet very complicated beers. When you look at an actual English smoked beer, it's a wonderful, wonderful lager. When you look at the Unetichke 12-degree Bohemian lager, it's a straightforward, it's like about barely 5%, a wonderful lager with a wonderful kind of a hoppy note in there, a big malt body, finishes dry though, which I really, really love. And the color beer, the same thing. These are for me, when you compare them to ales, much less complicated, but they have. It's such a wonderful world of beers that this is coming back to the United States is awesome. I'm just nervous, really nervous, that we will end up where we started with these huge lager beers, almost like the international mass beer lager bottom for many beers. I just hope that this will not happen, that people will embrace it and actually will push everybody to a top level in terms of lager brewing.
Well, Chris, you studied. Chris, you're also an advanced Cicerone. Give you props. Congratulations. You studying a lot of the numbers. You said that beer imports are up. Where's the market going with lagers, craft lagers?
Yeah, I mean, we are wandering very deep into the land of Chris's opinion right now. So we're not so much in the land of fact. But that being said, I think that there's two things. So I don't think there's too much doom and gloom in terms of us regressing back to the land of adjunct light lager for two main reasons. One is people don't really regress in their taste preferences. I'm not saying that there isn't a time and a place for American light lager, but what I am saying is that when you do get a flavor for something and you have an expectation for something, you generally don't lower that expectation over your lifetime, right? So as the education continues, as the access to more beer styles continues, as American breweries kind of embrace lager and embrace traditional lagering techniques and brewing styles just more ubiquitously, I think that we're going to see a lot of appreciation for the style, and I do think it's going to grow because there's so many great breweries in this country now that have popped up in the last 5 or 10 years that have specifically specialized, like Chris Loring at Notch, right? Like Jack's Abbey, like these guys that have done a great job of making really good lager, using lagering techniques, using traditional ingredients, things like that, and making sure that the ingredients speak for themselves, right? Because the big difference is that where the big hazy double IPA, you can really mask and hide a lot. You get that viscosity, you get the texture, you obviously get that fruity, dry hop note, right? That can mask a lot of what's going on inside of the beer. There's very little place for something to hide, right? So you're going to get the sulfur, you're going to get the DMS, you're going to get the overwrought protein, sort of eggy character. Like, you're going to get those things if you don't dial it in perfectly, and so I think I have a lot of hope And I know that as people drink more and more beer, they do sort of tend to go for those sessionable lager styles. The first thing I see on the menu at a brewery, if I see a lager and I go, how's the lager? And they look at me and they go, this is an exciting beer. I finally got it. And I go, I'll take a pint of that. You know, that's the first place.
Right.
That's great. And we're going to take a short break. We'll be back in a minute on Beer Sessions Radio.
My name is Brandon Hoy, co-owner of Roberta's, a super duper awesome place. Roberta's is a very, 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 very proud sponsor of the Heritage Radio Network. We're also super awesome. Thank you, Heritage.
All right. Hey, welcome back to Beer Sessions Radio on the Heritage Radio Network. As Jamie Oliver says, congratulations, Heritage Radio Network. It's the 10th anniversary or something like that, y'all. Wow, we're here at Roberta's Pizza, and I will say this. Number one beer at the bar right now is a German Pils. So we've got a great show. We're talking about lagers and the history of lagers with Matthias of Be United and the crew. So, George, the second beer you poured for us is this Czech lager.
Yeah, so this is a Unatica 12-degree lager. This is from the Unatica Brewery, which is just outside of Prague. And as we were talking about before, the Czechs really like to sort of organize their beer by strength. So this is their 12-degree lager, very similar to what we would here call a Pilsner, but of course it's not called that there. This beer is produced quite traditionally. It uses all Czech floor malted barley. They use hops from the Zatek region, or as we know it, Saz hops. The beer is open, fermented, and primary, and then obviously cold conditioned. And it was sent to us unfiltered and unpasteurized, as it should be. And it's a really special beer and a great example.
Let's talk about how you're rolling this out. So, first of all, the Czech brewers were hesitant to ship overseas.
Yes, very.
And then how are you ensuring the freshness?
So it's as we talked about earlier, it's shipped via the temperature-controlled tank containers, and then of course kegged in Connecticut. We are only sending out kegs of this beer, and we're asking the accounts that receive this beer to pour it as quickly as they possibly can, and to keep it cold as all the time.
And I know you're on the streets of New York. You were my rep at Jimmy's Number 43. We're a couple bars in the city that are carrying this.
Michael, you want to comment on that one?
A lot, actually. A lot of our customers were really excited about receiving this stuff, mainly because an unfiltered, unpasteurized Czech lager was something that I'd say, for all intents and purposes, like receiving a really great one in the United States hadn't really been achieved yet. So now that lagers are becoming a lot more popular, like we've already been talking about for the last half
That was
hour.
a great statement, Michael. Thank you.
You're welcome. Did I step over the line?
You did it right.
All right.
It was just declarative. We like declarative statements. It's powerful.
There we go. A lot of customers were really excited about receiving something like this from us through the temperature-controlled tank container because they were aware that it would arrive in ultimate freshness. So, it's more a question of what craft beer account in New York didn't pick it up, honestly. The Gingerman, Haymaker, Gold Star in Brooklyn, Proletariat in the East Village, Spite and Dival picked up some, so did Torst. Owl Farm in Park Slope got some, as is on the west side. Had a gravity cask of it. I'm definitely leaving out a ton of people that picked up this beer.
No, but that's a good.
Really
that's good. Good.
It's good company. Jimmy's would have gotten one too.
Another thing that we did is we were limited to 1 keg per account. We wanted to make sure that obviously we requested all accounts to tap it extremely fast. We don't want them to end up sitting in their cold box. And we know with all of these accounts, they have fantastic beer sitting in their cold box. And not forget about it. No bottles, no cans, nothing at all, only available on draft.
That's great. And you're really proud of this too, aren't you,
Matthias?
Matthias?
It's kind of, because we have worked on that for a long time. It sounds like we just started with it in November, but actually one of our sales managers, he lives in California, Micah Hartman, that's his baby. He has been working on that for 6 or 8 years. And it was funny because each time we have a sales meeting where I call in everybody, he wanted to present lagers from Czech Republic, and everybody laughed at him and said, "Okay, don't talk to me about lagers in Czech Republic. The market here in the United States wants complicated ales and lambics and sour ales and barrel aged beers. We don't need any lagers from Czech Republic. There's simply no demand there." That was like 8 years ago. So he kind of felt really bad that whatever he researched was not relevant for us. And then everything changed 2 or 3 years ago. And so he obviously goes back there once a year. And then he started to have very serious discussions with these breweries. But the breweries told him, "There's no way we will give you our beer. It's far too far away from us. We have no control over it." So eventually, our temperature control tank container concept, that was the one thing that convinced them to give it a shot.
Can I add something? As a rep for Be United, having working for the company for 10 years, it was kind of like one of the holes, I think, in our portfolio. Like one of the hallmarks at Be United is our portfolio consists of a lot of these different beer styles and breweries that are really deeply historic. Schlenkerla from Bamberg, who we've talked about here. We also import the Schneider brewery from Bavaria. We have an alt beer from Düsseldorf, and I could go on and on, but it's like really
Kolsch,
what
Reisdorf
Kolsch. Yes, thank you. So it's really what Be United was founded on was these historic breweries, and then over time, obviously, we expanded our portfolio and we started working with a lot newer breweries and like expanding to a bit more of like an experimental and innovative portion of the portfolio. But again, like the foundation of Be United is like these historic breweries, and like one of the elements that we didn't have was like a historic Czech lager, which is a very traditional, one of the key beer traditions in like the world of beer. So we're really happy to have it in our list to finally have some Czech producers to be able to sell.
That's great, and I'm glad you mentioned your traditional styles, because it is true. I mean, a few years ago we did a tasting looking at we're talking about 1840. Imagine beer styles that were around before 1840, and Matthias mentioned it. But all those styles you mentioned, alt beers, Keller beers, these all go back. Let's talk a little bit more about this German, Czech beer history and these styles. And I know that probably those older beers had some smoke to them. But let's talk a little bit more about the styles in particular. Maybe what appeals to you about it, Matthias, since you've made such a focus for your company around them.
Well, for me, Bamberg. In this case, let's talk to a little bit about Bamberg and Matthias Trom and Echt Schlenkerle. Basically, the classic world classic smoked beer brewery in Bamberg. And actually, the building goes way back to the 14th century, if I remember correctly. And then the brewery started like in the 16th century. What we have here to taste is it's called we call it Echt Schlenkerle Helles Mürzen. And it was created by Matthias Trom, and it's a wonderful complex hybrid. It's based on Echtschlinkle Helles, which is, funny enough, not smoked at all. It just goes through the same equipment as his smoked beer and uses the same yeast, so it brings in smoky characters. And after it's done, it's basically going back to the classic traditional method of krausening. He adds fresh young green beer to it, but not the Helles. He's adding the Echtschlinkle Rauchbiermürzen to it, about 15% of it. And then he allows it to mature for another 4, 5, 6 weeks, or I think up to 3 months or so. And that's what we're tasting here. It's a bottom fermenting beer, has wonderful smoky notes to it, brought in from the Rauchbiermürzen, is kind of light in body. It's a session beer because it's really carried by the Helles. For me, an extraordinary idea, an extraordinary expression of a bottom fermenting beer, a session beer that incorporates a very, very classic traditional method, which is called krausening.
I would also say that in terms of the Rauch beer style, right? This is lovely, by the way. I've never had this. This just adds like a layer of sessionability onto your.
Wait, this is the Schlenkele Helles
Helles
Märzen?
Märzen,
Yep.
yeah. In Europe, it's called Krausen, but yeah.
Yeah, and this is and I love that technique of adding freshly primary fermenting beer on top, the krausening technique, which is fantastic. For anyone who hasn't drank Rauch beer, if you haven't experienced this, Schlenkler is probably your first. It's probably your first adventure into that realm. Most people, I would say, this is a relatively polarizing style for a lot of people if they're not sort of into an understanding of the cultural significance of this particular beer, right? The understanding that most malt was probably at least marginally smoky up until the 19th century, things like that. But I would suggest that give it 2 pints, right? Give it at least 2.
3.
Give it 3 pints. So, but exactly. So there's a rule. I think the rule in Bamberg is 3 pints.
That's right.
If it's your first time,
The first pint, you hate it. And so most people will stop. And some people say, okay, I'm already kind of half drunk. Let's give me a second pint. The second pint gets through much easier, and then they're getting even more drunk. And then the third pint, they absolutely, if they get to the third pint, then they love it.
But you find the subtlety, you find the hop character, and there's a verdant hop character in the background of this particular beer. You find all that stuff, but it does take a few pints
Michael,
to understand.
noch ein Bier bitte.
Yeah.
We're learning a little German as we talk krausening. Well, this is fun. So this is the Bamberg beer that you brought.
Yes. Yep.
This one.
Well, and another thing to mention too, we're talking about Helles here, and this is another sort of further extension of the legacy of the Pilsner, and it's important to talk about too because after 1842, Pilsner quickly became very popular, and around 1870 and on, this style of beer really started to take over, and so you had a lot of German breweries that started to try to emulate the Pilsner beer. So the Helles was born in the late 1800s and 1890. I think Spaten brewed the first Helles. And you see the birth of something like Kolsch, which we'll taste later. This was really a response to the popularity of these pale lagers. Even something like Altbier was brewed in response to the Pilsner style. And then, of course, you had a lot of German breweries that would emulate this Pilsner style as well. And we have Einbecker Pils here, which we'll also taste. This is a very different take on the Pils in general. And you'd think, at first glance that they're very similar, but, a German Pils and a Czech lager are very, very different. And then even the English ale brewers, they even had to respond to this style by, brewing these lighter styles of ale in England and in the UK in general. And then Pilsner, lager itself became very popular in Scotland, actually. But anyway.
One thing about the Be United portfolio, you guys can all answer this. You've stuck with certain brands like Schneider, Schlenkerla, Reisdorf, Uriga for the alt beers for so many years. What is it like for you, Matthias, to bring in a new brand like these Czech breweries?
We've always looked at these breweries, and because Czech Republic is really one of the classic historic brew countries. There is obviously Germany, there's Belgium, there's UK, but there's always Czech Republic. Has always been, at least over the past 20, 25 years, difficult to do it from a market perspective. There was not really a market here for it. And second of all, you cannot just bring them in because you're not getting them. You cannot just go there and say, okay, I want to buy your bottles and then bring it over to the United States. They would not give it to you. So you need to build an infrastructure first before you are able to do that. And then the market has to develop. I think a great example is St. Georgenbräu Keller beer, the beer that we started with. It was part of our portfolio when we started in 1994, 1995. And the beer has not changed, but in 94, 95, the timing was not right. People were not into beers like this. They were starting to learn much more about ales, and so wheat beers came alive, and then the Belgians obviously pushed it quite a bit. We at that time, after 2 or 3 years, we basically had to give up on Georgenbräu. And the Keller beer, not because the beer was not fantastic. The beer is fantastic. Just the market was not right. Almost 2 years ago, when we saw the change in market, consumers are starting to be extremely interested in lager, in great bottom fermenting beers. I contacted St. Georgenbräu again and said, I think this time the timing is right, and so far it has proven correct.
And what about for you guys, bringing in new brands and, testing the market, or you don't have to do that?
I mean, I feel like I mentioned before that I thought that the Czech Republic was one element that we were missing in the Be United book. And, I'm really proud to have a beer from the Czech Republic that I can sell to accounts. I think it's really great to have such an example available to U.S. drinkers. And because of our infrastructure, we were able to convince these breweries, which are considered in the Czech Republic to be really great breweries. That it really it was not easy getting these guys to come on board. It took convincing. And it was because of the temperature-controlled tank containers and because of our system in Connecticut that they agreed to come on board with us.
And one of the things now, obviously, we are working with two wonderful Czech small breweries in the Czech Republic, and obviously they have not a huge portfolio, but they have wonderful seasonals, and so we are going to get started with those seasonals as well. One of the things that was obviously worked out really well when we got the Unetički pivovar and also the Hostomice dark lager. When we kegged it, we went all the way. We shipped it to California. And also Portland, Oregon, and also Seattle, Washington State. And we were a little bit nervous about it, but the feedback via Instagram, via social media was incredible. And obviously we forwarded to both breweries in Czech Republic, and they're excited about it. So the beers are very, very fragile. They're very sensitive. You have to treat them very, very correctly. Will they ever, you cannot really scale them up in a way and say, okay, now we are bringing in tons and tons of stuff. I don't think it will work that way, but you have to treat almost every keg like as an individual wonderful unit, and you have to make sure that it goes to accounts that appreciate it and tap it right away as quickly as possible. The shelf life of these beers is I would say maybe 3 months or something like this. I would because they're completely unfiltered, they are unpasteurized. I would be very. That's what we assume. It's a very short period of time.
Hold on 1 second. We're going to take another short break, Matt. We'll be back in a minute on Beer Sessions Radio. All right. Hey, welcome back to Beer Sessions Radio on the Heritage Radio Network, celebrating 10 years in food radio and beer radio. All right. We're talking lagers, Czech lagers, Bamberg lagers here with Mr. Matthias Neidhart of Be United and crew. Matthias, I'm going to go back to the St. Georgen, the Keller beer. You know, I love these styles. When I say lager, I think we covered some of the different styles and colors. You know, there's darker and amber. I'm always looking for a dark lager. You've got alt beers. The Schlenkler portfolio seems to really cover all the colors and strengths of lagers. You want to talk about that? Just you're saying that lagers are simpler than ales, but in some ways, there's, especially in Germany, there's so many different styles of lagers. Bock beers are lagers too, aren't they?
Yes, yes, they are. And you know the Bock beers and the double Bock beers but I mean, by pure definition, Chris, I don't know how you see it, but by pure definition, if you know you have basically the yeast works at cold temperature, anywhere between 35 and 38, 39 degrees Fahrenheit, it works there. There you're already taking out a lot of parameters that you can work with in the area of ales. So you reduce that. That also means what's left over. It's basically your water. It's your different types of hops and malt. And keep in mind, in Germany, they truly believe in the German purity law, so that's it. You cannot play around with anything else. And the Czech Republic, the historic breweries, they basically follow the same idea. They don't do they are not going outside these ingredients. And so, again, the parameters you can work with are much more limited. Therefore, the end result will be a much smaller variety of different interpretations of lagers that you can create. However, if you're a fantastic brewmaster, that's all you need. You can create fantastic lagers.
Yeah, definitionally, you're taught in beer, you know, to sort of help, you know, the hierarchy of beer is ale and lager, and then you kind of look at the substyles, right, from an international perspective. When you look at the more traditional brewing cultures, and back to your point really quick, Matthias, the other point you made, which was that I think education and the educated beer drinker is really unlocking a lot of this demand, right? Because when you understand the story, when you understand the background, when you understand the passion that goes into that, the fact that you had to twist their arm incredibly hard to get them just to send over 35 hecks of beer, right, which is a drop in the bucket compared to their annual production. It's amazing to think about that, right? And that's another heartening feature about the American beer consumer in terms of what you guys do as an importer. But when you look at the definition of ales and lagers, that's one thing that we learned. But over in continental Europe, and I don't have too much firsthand experience with this, but from what I've seen, it's more about that process, right? It's more about the lagering itself, right? It's more about the way you treat the products. Certainly the yeast has something to do with it, right, and is a huge part of it. But in terms of what you do, that process that you stick to, the reason you do those things, that technique is really sort of speaks more to the style, I think, in a lot of cases than the actual chemical definition of what's going on.
There's no question about it. I mean, look, when you talk to the Czech brewers in that category, when you talk to the German brewers, it's about the method, it's about the process. Just talking about double decoction, they would not go away from double decoction, even if you in these days you could use different methods as well.
Which is incredibly inefficient way of brewing.
That is exactly right.
Decoction mashes are, for the most part, non-existent in American brewing.
That's correct.
And you talk to most American brewers, and they'll just say, "Oh, it's cool. We can throw in, you know, some caramel malt or some melanoidin malt. It's the same deal." But for the Czech brewers, that is in effect like law. You have to do double or triple decoction on these beers, and that process is critical.
Yeah, and then, you know, the fermentation time, obviously, but also the maturation time. The maturation time is so much longer than in the world of ales. But even within lager breweries or so, the maturation time is critical. It's crucial to allow all these complex flavors, aromas at a cold temperature to come together and create something special. It just takes an enormous amount of time.
Well, it seems like it's a very strange time in the world of beer where craft beer is growing around the world. But if you go to, you know, it seems like 2018 was the year of I can open a brewery in any country, buy the same equipment and make the same styles of hazy IPAs anywhere in the world. And yet, what are these great traditional beers, that I really want to drink?
Right. And, I think another thing to note, too, here is as Chris was saying earlier, there's with a lot of these styles, there's very little to hide behind with these lagers. And, the focus really with all of these beers is on ingredients and the quality of these ingredients. I mean, Schlenkerla is malting their own barley, as is most Czech brewers. They're floor malting their barley. They're sourcing the best Saz hops that they can. And that's really critical for these beers. Because again, as Chris was saying, there's little to hide behind here.
I think one thing is that it takes a lot of hard work to make a good lager. I remember a few years ago, there weren't too many really good Pilsners being made in New York. And Folks Beer, which at the time was a newer brewery in Brooklyn, he made one Pilsner that summer. And he said, it almost killed me because I had to keep the beer in the fermentation tanks for so long, but that Pilsner that came out was the best Pilsner I had that year.
I mean, the technique and process are critical, and again, this is something Chris mentioned earlier. When you go into a brewery and you ask about their lager, I think it's the best indication of a good brewer because it shows that their technique is really spot on because it has to be. There's no room for error.
And Folks Beer specifically, shout out to those guys. The Old Bavarian lager they make, the OBL. That Helles, it's just gotten better and better over the years, and that's an example of a local brewery in the U.S. taking pride in their lager brewing techniques in the way that they've made this beer, and the fact that every time I have a pint of it, I want 5 more pints of it, and then the next time I go, I want an even more bad. I have even greater desire for that because there is something so beautiful and sublime about dialing something in to the point where it is perfect, right? And I think that's true from a cultural perspective. I think your consumer in Europe is looking for a very different thing than your American consumer, right? So that's one thing. But just looking at the overall kind of paradigm shift in the U.S. in terms of how we look at beer, the more you drink these beers, the more you understand those types of things. That's really where you need to be. That's
great. A couple other shout outs. So we just drank the Einbecker Pils. Matthias, you've had relationships with these breweries for so many years.
Huge.
Tell us about Einbecker, how you got to know them, how you developed that relationship.
For us, huge. It just shows how challenging it is to work with breweries in their mindset. Einbecker, from the get-go, it's a very historic brewery, goes back many hundred years. For Americans, very hard to believe, their core packaging is green bottles. And they are very, very proud of it, and they would never change it. And the German consumer has accepted it. Extremely difficult to sell in the United States because we all know, every American knows green bottles are the least protective, besides clear bottle, the least protective bottle. So you have got to always be concerned about light damage in there. And so there's diacetyl and skunkiness and all kinds of threats out there. Finally, we talked to the brewmaster at Einbecker, so they agreed to put the Einbecker Brauherrn Pilsner in cans for United States, and we just opened a can, and it's like day and night. It's a beautiful Pilsner, very different from the lagers that we had, but it's a true Pilsner with a wonderful Hallertauer hoppy character to it, a dryness to it. I think it's special. And
this is phenomenal.
It's phenomenal.
It's phenomenal.
And for me, the phenomenal thing is when you compare it to a bottle version, it's like totally night and day.
It's really
phenomenal.
Yep. Yeah. Like, I've never had an Einbecker Pils so good.
Yeah.
This is the first time I've tried it. It's impressive.
It's very different from your Czech Pilsners, obviously. You find this is like a much edgier beer. The water is harder in Einbeck than it is in Pilsen, and this really changes the beer, and of course the differing hop varieties used too.
We're going to wrap up soon, but let's just do a quick rundown. So, Chris, we started by talking about the different gravities and colors of of Czech lagers, because we're trying to talk about the world of lagers. So I can go and get what's the name of the brewery that we had before? Unetiki?
The Unetichki Pivovar, but it's only available on draft, and we are sold out. Next thing coming in about 3 weeks via 10 containers is from Hostamici Pivovar. It's their dark lager. It's a 14-degree dark lager.
So I could get a 14 dark.
That's right. That's right. During this coming year, we'll bring in other seasonals from both breweries, and they will all vary, and they will all go by numbers. We'll bring in for summertime a 10 degree, a 10 Blato, which is like barely 4% or so. For wintertime, and light in color. And then for wintertime next year, coming November, December, maybe a 15, 16 degree or so dark color again.
It's kind of fun. It's kind of like Spinal Tap, turn it up to 11. I do know about Czech lagers, and I've had them before, and I love this 10, 12, 14. And it's kind of fun when you have the beer coming from their brewery, whether it's seasonally or just you happen to have it. I say, well, I really like the 12 more than the 10.
Right. The funny part is, if I can say that, because the Trappist breweries also use numbers very often, but they don't match. So the Czech numbers are very, very different from when you look at Rochefort 10 or like a 12 Westfalen or so. It's very, very different. Unestice Pivovar, the 12 degree is a 12. It's a 12 degrees, about barely 5%. It measures, just the amount of sugar in the wort or so.
The next podcast will do how to say all these Czech terms.
Well, we're bringing some Czech guys, Hey, and then the last beer, so the next generation, so, your son, Ben,
Yep.
Let's tell quick. We did a show a few years ago. If you look it up, On Location at Be United and OEC is a great episode.
Yeah. So, and Ben has always been very intrigued by Czech Republic, by these classic traditional beer styles. So at OEC, they developed a OEC Pilsner, which is basically exactly the same, using the same method as back in Czech Republic. It's double decoction. And he uses not Czech desserts variety. He uses Tettnanger, Hersbruck, and Spalt hops. Then he varies with it. Then he ages it. He ferments for 5 days. Then he ferments it for 3 weeks in oak barrel, and you can taste it already. Brings in a kind of a beautiful sourness in there, and then it's aged for eight weeks. A little bit dry hop then with Hersbruck, I believe, and that's what we are tasting right now.
So the OEC, it's from Connecticut. Do you think that what Ben's doing at OEC is he like going back to 19th century styles?
Yes, has always been. When you read about OEC, also the Latin name, he has always played around. He has always been intrigued and inspired by old historic recipes, and he wants to add his own interpretation to it, a modern interpretation. But it has always been about classic historic styles.
So it's like an old brew system with open fire, and then it goes right off the tanks into a cool ship, right?
It goes in a cool ship, goes into an open fermenter. We have different fermentation vessels made from granite or what else do we have? Concrete. We have an amphora, and then it always goes into
stainless. Really
stainless.
Advanced.
We have and then we have and then always goes into oak barrels. This one in straight oak barrels, sometimes or very often in wine barrels, red wine or white wine barrels.
It's nice. It's funny. This is the New World Pilsner.
Yep.
But this taste is probably more Old World than anything else we've had today.
Yeah.
Any last questions? Chris, it's great having you here. And the first time you've met Matthias, you know a lot of the brands, Reisdorf, Schneider. Any last question for Matthias?
No specific question for you guys. Huge fan of the portfolio, like I said earlier. And I guess I would implore all the beer drinkers out there, everybody who's listening to this, try Be United's portfolio, try traditional European styles. It will make you a better beer drinker. It will make you respectful and understanding of the process and the effort that goes into a beautiful Czech Pilsner, into a beautiful Chardonnay that you might have next time you go to continental Europe and try these things. It's worth it. It's worth doing those kinds of things, and I love it.
And George, on the spot.
Yes.
So I want to do at my local pub this weekend a survey of traditional German beer styles. Give me 4 beers I should try from your portfolio so I get a real broad sense of German beer.
Okay, well that's a tough question. I would say Schneiderweiss.
Of course.
I would say Reisdorf.
Kolsch.
Reisdorf Kolsch, yep. St. George Brett Keller beer. So that's a good one. You could do Einbecker Pilsner too, but definitely Schlenkerla. You need some smoked beer in there.
And maybe something from Dusseldorf.
Oh yeah, Urga Alt beer, definitely.
Is the
can't miss that one.
Now, it's on its way to us also in a temperature-controlled container. The Uriger Sticke, this time the Rhön, which is basically dry hopped with Hersberger, was filled in our tank like 2 weeks ago, and it's on its way to us. So it's a very special once-a-year Sticke version that basically elevates the Sticke to even more kind of a hoppy aroma in finish.
And the stick is the alt beer, the Doppelstickers.
That's right.
The darker.
That's right.
Guys, this has been an awesome show. Matthias, it's so great to have you back. We haven't had you on for a couple years. George, Michael, always great having you guys. And Chris.
Thanks, Jimmy.
Listen, all I can say is we're going to do more shows like this. I'm very inspired today. And thank you all so much. Once again, everyone say their name one more time. Go around the room, please.
I'm Matthias with Be United.
I'm George with Be United.
Michael Opolensky with Be United.
Chris with the Brew Enthusiasts.
All right, and big shout out to our producer, Justin Kennedy, engineer Matt Patterson, intern Dylan Hoyer. I'm Jimmy Carboni, the host of Beer Sessions Radio. We'll catch you next time on the Heritage Radio Network. All right, guys.
Woo!
Woo!
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Heritage Radio Network, food radio supported by you. For our freshest content and to hear about exclusive events, subscribe to our newsletter. Enter your email at the bottom of our website, heritageradionetwork.org. Connect with us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at heritage_radio. Heritage Radio Network is a nonprofit organization driving conversations to make the world a better, fairer, more delicious place. And we couldn't do it without support from listeners like you. Want to be a part of the food world's most innovative community? Rate the shows you like, tell your friends, and please join our community by becoming a member. Just click on the beating heart at the top right of our homepage. Thanks for listening.